Spain discovered a mountain made of silver in 1545. Literally, Cerro Rico, rich mountain, in what's now Bolivia, produced at its peak nearly 60% of the world's silver output. Between the 16th and 18th centuries, 85% of global silver came from this single mountain. The Spanish Empire became the wealthiest power on earth. They controlled the largest empire in history. Silver flowed from the Americas to Spain in quantities that would be worth trillions today. And Spain went bankrupt 4 times. Philip II, one of the most powerful monarchs in European history, defaulted on his debts in 1557, 1560, 1575, and 1596. The richest empire in the world, extracting more precious metal than had ever been seen in human history, couldn't pay its bills. This isn't paradox. This is extraction economics. When empires prioritize taking wealth over creating it, when they confuse commodity flow with actual prosperity, when military spending outpaces productive capacity, the result isn't sustainable wealth, it's catastrophic inflation, economic dependency, and eventual collapse. Spain's silver story is the clearest historical example of how resource extraction destroys the extractor, and the pattern is repeating right now in resource-dependent economies across the world. The Spanish found Cerro Rico in the mountains near Potosí, Bolivia, at nearly 16,000 feet altitude. The discovery happened in 1545, and it transformed a small pre-Hispanic hamlet in the icy Andes into one of the largest cities in the world by the early 17th century. At its peak, Potosí had 160,000 Spanish colonists and 13,500 indigenous people forced to work in the mines under the Mita system, a forced labor program the Spanish adapted from Inca tribute systems. The city's population exceeded that of London or Paris. Its motto, inscribed on its coat of arms, was accurate and boastful. "I am rich Potosí, treasure of the world, king of all mountains and envy of kings." The scale of extraction was unprecedented. At peak production around 1600, the Potosí mines numbered over 600 separate operations. They collectively yielded 9 million silver pesos each year, more than all other silver mines in the world combined. Between 1545 and the 18th century, an estimated 60,000 tons of silver came out of Cerro Rico. That's not counting silver from Zacatecas, Guanajuato, and Taxco in Mexico, which added millions more. By 1600, Spanish America produced 10 times the quantity of silver that Europe's mines yielded. The mountain itself, originally estimated at around 5,000 meters, now stands at approximately 4,750 meters. Mining literally lowered it by 250 meters. It's called the mountain that eats men because approximately 8 million miners died there, though some historians argue this figure includes all deaths in the Viceroyalty of Peru, and the actual number was hundreds of thousands. Even the conservative estimate represents industrial-scale death for silver extraction. The working conditions were catastrophic. Initially, the mines had vast deposits of pure silver and silver chloride, making extraction relatively easy. But by 1565, the high-grade ores ran out. That's when the Spanish introduced the patio process, using mercury to amalgamate with silver and extract it from low-grade ores. Mercury poisoning became endemic. Miners worked long hours in toxic conditions, exposed to mercury vapor, often dying within years. The Mita system compelled indigenous communities to supply workers annually. Families were destroyed. Villages were depopulated. The productive capacity of the Andean region was gutted to feed Spanish demand for silver. And here's the thing, this silver didn't enrich Spain. It destroyed Spain's economy. Here's how the destruction mechanism worked. When silver first started flowing to Spain in the 1540s and 1550s, it seemed like a gift from God. More money meant more wealth, right? Not even close. What actually happened was inflation, the Spanish price revolution. Prices in Spain doubled in the first half of the 16th century. Over 150 years, prices rose roughly sixfold. That's about 1.2% annual inflation, which sounds modest by modern standards, but consider that commodity prices had remained stable for over 300 years prior to this. From 1200 to 1500, prices barely moved. Then suddenly, sustained inflation for over a century. Why? Because Spain was flooding its economy with silver without increasing productive capacity. The formula is simple. When you increase the money supply without increasing the goods and services available to buy, prices rise. Spain had more silver, but it wasn't producing more food, more textiles, more manufactured goods. It was just extracting metal. Economist Milton Friedman said inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon, too much money chasing too few goods. Spain proved this 400 years before Friedman wrote it. The massive influx of American silver and gold to European markets caused commodity prices to increase by 400% over the 16th century. Spanish wages rose to match, which made Spanish exports uncompetitive. Why would anyone buy expensive Spanish goods when they could buy cheaper products from France, England, or the Netherlands? Spain's manufacturing sector, already weak, was devastated. The country became a conduit. Silver flowed in from the Americas and immediately flowed back out to pay for imports from the rest of Europe. Spain wasn't producing wealth. It was redistributing extracted silver to countries that actually made things. The Spanish crown made it worse through systematic mismanagement. Charles V, who ruled from 1516 to 1556, used silver revenues to fund endless military campaigns. He was fighting the French, the Ottomans, German Protestant princes, Italian city-states. The Habsburg Empire was at war constantly. The rising costs of war had dramatic consequences. One campaign in the 1550s cost as much as an entire war in the 1520s. Military spending was exponential, while silver revenues, though massive, couldn't keep up. Charles V was forced to borrow from international bankers, primarily Genoese, at interest rates that grew from 17% to 48%. Think about that. The richest empire on earth was borrowing money at usurious rates because it spent faster than it extracted. During Charles V's reign, 15 million ducats worth of bullion reached the imperial treasury. It wasn't enough. He left his son Philip II a mountain of debt. Philip II inherited in 1556 and immediately faced financial crisis. He was called Philip the Prudent because he was a systematic administrator who studied every detail, who built the first government archive to organize records, who carefully considered every decision. Despite this brilliance, he defaulted on debt in 1557, less than a year into his reign, then again in 1560, then 1575, then 1596. 4 bankruptcies in 40 years, while silver poured in from the Americas. The 1557 default involved 7.5 million ducats of outstanding short-term debt called asientos, high-cost loans typically serviced with American silver. Philip suspended payments, sending shockwaves through European financial markets. Banks in Seville collapsed. Credit markets froze. The 1575 default was worse, 3 million ducats of debt, nearly twice annual revenue. Philip wasn't just suspending interest payments. He was defaulting on principal and on long-term bonds held by bankers as collateral. The 1577 settlement involved write-offs of 30% to 58% depending on loan characteristics. On average, the Crown paid back 62 cents on the dollar. By 1596, the fourth default involved 7 million ducats. Each bankruptcy followed the same pattern. Military costs spiked, silver revenues couldn't cover spending plus debt service, Philip suspended payments, bankers negotiated settlements, lending resumed, the cycle repeated. The dependency trap was complete. Spain needed silver to service debt, which meant it needed continued extraction from the Americas, which required military forces to control the colonies, which required borrowing to fund those forces, which created more debt requiring more silver. It's a closed loop where extraction funds the military that enables extraction. When silver production eventually declined, by 1700, existing mines produced only a quarter of what they'd yielded a century before. Spain had no productive capacity to fall back on. The economy was hollowed out, manufacturing destroyed by inflation, agriculture neglected for colonial adventure, the entire structure dependent on extraction that was guaranteed to eventually decline. This is the resource curse in pure form. Abundant natural resources lead not to prosperity but to economic destruction. Compare Spain to England or the Netherlands in the same period. Those countries had less silver but built manufacturing capacity, invested in infrastructure, developed financial markets, created productive economies. Spain had infinite silver and went bankrupt repeatedly because it never built anything except extraction systems and armies. The inflation Spain unleashed didn't stay in Spain. Silver flowed to the rest of Europe, fueling what became known as the price revolution continent-wide. Prices rose in France, England, Germany, the Netherlands, everywhere silver circulated. By the late 16th century, the inflation had spread globally. Spanish silver flowed across the Atlantic to Spain, then across Europe to buy goods, then across Asia via the Manila galleons to China, where massive demand for silver existed. The Ming dynasty had monetized its economy, using silver as the backbone of its tax system. Chinese demand soaked up huge quantities of Spanish silver. But when silver supplies from the Americas decreased in the early 17th century, China experienced monetary shortage that contributed to economic instability and social unrest, ultimately contributing to the fall of the Ming dynasty in 1644. Spain had managed to destabilize economies across 3 continents through pure extraction. The Spanish even debased their own coinage, trying to squeeze more value from the silver they had. Following earlier debasements by Henry VIII of England, Philip II tried to cement his legacy through coinage changes. Spanish kings had issued copper fractional coins called blancas with nominal silver content to convince the public they were precious metal money. The silver fineness was reduced repeatedly, 3.47% in 1471 to 2.43% in 1497 to 1.909% in 1552 to 1.39% in 1566. By the start of the 17th century, purely copper coinage circulated. Philip II ordered silver coinage devaluation on November 29, 1596, after his third bankruptcy. The famous Spanish piece of 8 reales de plata was debased. By the 1630s, most coins had 20% to 30% less silver than previously required. This is currency debasement identical to Rome reducing silver content in the denarius. It's the same mechanism. When extraction can't fund spending, debase the currency, which causes more inflation, which requires more debasement. It's a death spiral. The Spanish crown frittered away precious metals, usually to secure loans from bankers long before the annual treasure fleets even arrived in Europe. They were spending anticipated silver years in advance, borrowing against future extraction, which meant when the fleets arrived, the silver was already spoken for. The system was designed for collapse. The military overextension was staggering. Spain was fighting in the Netherlands, where the Dutch revolt dragged on for 80 years and drained resources continuously. Spain fought the Ottoman Empire in the Mediterranean, culminating in the Holy League's costly victory at Lepanto in 1571. Spain launched the Armada against England in 1588, which cost approximately 10 million ducats, roughly 2 years of total revenue, and failed disastrously. Then Spain spent a similar sum rebuilding the fleet. Spain fought France repeatedly. Spain intervened in German religious wars. Spain tried to suppress Protestant princes. Spain maintained garrison forces across its global empire. The logistical costs of projecting power across Europe, the Americas, Asia, and Africa were unsustainable. Even with infinite silver, Spain couldn't fund that level of military ambition. The empire was stretched beyond its limits, neglected and underfunded despite Potosi's riches. Other European nations, France, the Netherlands, England, built modern navies and challenged Spanish dominance. By the mid-17th century, Spain's power was broken. The Peace of Westphalia in 1648 marked the end of Spanish dominance in Europe. The Treaty of the Pyrenees in 1659 ceded territory to France. By 1700, Spain was a second-rate power. The empire that had controlled more of the world than Rome collapsed within 150 years of discovering infinite silver. The second wave of Spanish silver in the 18th century, better managed, helped improve Spain's fortunes temporarily. But the damage was done. The pattern had been established. Spain never developed productive capacity because extraction seemed easier. Why build factories when you can extract silver? Why invest in agriculture when you can import food? Why develop financial sophistication when Genoese bankers will lend against next year's treasure fleet? The answers are obvious in retrospect. Because extraction eventually ends, because commodity dependence creates vulnerability, because military power without economic foundation collapses. But Spain learned these lessons through catastrophe. The modern parallel is everywhere. Oil-rich nations with hollowed-out economies, mining-dependent countries with no manufacturing, resource extractors that import everything despite sitting on wealth. Venezuela has the world's largest oil reserves and widespread poverty. The mechanism is identical: extraction without production, commodity dependence without diversification, military spending to control resources without investment in human capital. The Dutch disease, named for the Netherlands after natural gas discovery, describes how resource booms destroy other economic sectors through currency appreciation and neglected investment. Spain had the Spanish disease 400 years earlier. The formula for collapse is consistent. Discover extractable resource, flood economy with commodity, watch prices rise, see productive sectors die, borrow against future extraction, spend on military to control extraction, default when commodity flow can't sustain spending, repeat until collapse. Spain proved it with silver. Modern petrostates are proving it with oil. The resource curse isn't mysterious. It's predictable. It's the inevitable result of choosing extraction over creation. This is the empire economy. Spain didn't become weak because it lacked silver. Spain became weak because it had too much silver and mistook extraction for prosperity. They confused commodity flow with wealth creation. They prioritized military spending over productive investment. They borrowed against future extraction instead of building present capacity. And they went bankrupt 4 times while controlling the largest pile of precious metal in human history. That's not bad luck. That's the mathematical outcome of extraction economics. When you optimize for taking instead of making, when you treat resources as infinite instead of investing in renewable productivity, when military power substitutes for economic foundation, collapse is guaranteed. The timeline is the only variable. Spain took 150 years. Modern resource-dependent economies are running the same playbook at faster speed. The mountain that financed an empire is still being mined today, still collapsing, still eating men, still producing silver. And Spain is still a secondary power 5 centuries later. That's what extraction without creation gets you: temporary wealth followed by permanent decline. Subscribe to see more patterns of how empires concentrate wealth and power through mechanisms that operate in plain sight but destroy the societies that employ them.